What's up, chess fans? We are here. You know what time it is, whether you are a veteran of the game or a Queen's Gambit convert. This is the FIDE Candidates Tournament, resuming after a 1 year pause. My name is Aakaash Meduri, National Master. My friends like to call me Aakash Money, so call me whatever you want. And this is a recap of the 8th round of the FIDE Candidates Tournament. So let's go ahead and just jump into the games, shall we? So this round was extremely interesting because so many people were anticipating what was going to happen after this 1 year break between candidates. So as you might remember, candidates was postponed due to the COVID pandemic. So now we're getting back into the action, and let's see what we've got. We've got 8 of the strongest players in the world duking it out for the chance to play against Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, and let's see what happens. So this round was very interesting because while not all of the games were decisive, there was a lot of action and a lot of things to be talked about. So we'll start off with the game between Wang Hao and Ding Liren, the two compatriots from China. So this game began as e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, a Scotch game, which is very interesting, a curious decision from Wang Hao, given that he has this reputation as a very solid player. And interesting that he didn't play bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez or Spanish, which is by far the most common approach taken by grandmasters, the world's elite, and it is very interesting that he ended up going with a Scotch game. So d4, we won't take too much time to look at the intricacies of the opening. This is just meant to be a recap. So knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c6, b takes c6, e5, queen e7, queen e2, knight d5, c4, bishop a6, b3, g6, bishop a3. An interesting move, bishop a3, although this is well known already for those versed in the theory. Most common is f4, but from what I was looking at in the database, Black seems to be doing quite well with d6. If you take a look at the Lichess database, you can see that it's an extremely drawish position from the 140 games that are occurring in this line in the Lichess Masters database. So Wang Hao decides to go bishop a3. So Ding Liren proceeded knight b4, bishop b2, bishop g7, a3, and knight d5, knight d2. Knight d2 is a very interesting move, I think an instructive moment of positional play. What white is signaling is that he wants to hop into e4 and then hop into f6. The f6 square should really stand out to you because of the pawn on e5 serving as this lever that's not only controlling space for white, but also really targeting this tender square on f6. So black castles, white castles, rook fe8, queen f3, knight b6. And so what you should really be thinking about in this type of position is both sides have castled on opposite sides, and that should signal to you that there's going to be a lot of play on the flanks. So knight e4, bishop takes e5, bishop e5, queen e5, knight f6, forking the king and the rook. So black goes king f8, knight takes e8, and queen a1. The queen penetrates into white's queen side, and it's already looking like it's going to be a draw just because of all of the possibilities with a threefold repetition. So king c2, queen a2, king c1, queen a3 check, king b1. And this is an interesting moment. I know that the Lichess database does show this game, but there was actually a correspondence game that was played, I believe, in 2016 that went rook b8 here. And the ending of this game is pretty quick, but nice, so I wanted to just show this. Queen c3. Knight takes c4, taking advantage of the fact that the pawn is pinned to the king due to the rook on b8. However, this is actually very bad for black because of queen h8, king e7, rook e1, king d8, and then a very nice finish, knight d6 checkmate. Not often that you get to use that notation, knight d6 checkmate. So, of course, both players were probably familiar with this correspondence game. I think this really just shows how deep the level of preparation is at the 2700 level. So, Ding plays knight a4, which is a very interesting move. Really getting that piece into the action and trying to force the matter for a threefold repetition. And that's actually what ends up happening very shortly. So queen f6, queen b3, king c1, queen a3. And if white is careless here with like king b1, that spells GG with rook b8, king c2. And rook b2, king c1, queen a1 would be mate. So even though it looks like the game's almost over, you have to still be careful. So king c2, queen a2, king c1, queen a3, king c2. And then they go into the threefold repetition. So an interesting game, which fizzled out quite quickly. So at the end of the day, they did draw, and it puts Wang Hao at 4 out of 8. So he's still in the middle of the pack. He's not doing too badly. He's going to have to try to muster out some wins as the tournament continues to go. Ding, unfortunately, is at 3 out of 8, and that almost certainly puts him out of contention to be Magnus's challenger moving forward. But, you know, Ding Liren is a fighter, and we'll have to see what happens. Maybe he'll be able to surprise us. So the next game we're going to look at is the game between Jan Nepomniacci, aka Nepo, and Anish Giri. This game is really interesting because prior to the break, Nepo was the joint leader of the candidates tournament, having a score of 4.5 out of 8, tied with Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. So Nepo, you know, he's really trying to maintain this lead. He understands that this opportunity is very hard to come by, and he wants to make sure he maximizes his chances. Whereas on the other side of the board, you have Anish Giri, who, as all of you probably know, social media fan favorite. And I saw a quote from Vishy Anand, former world champion, where he said that Giri, I believe, has shown the most improvement out of all of the current candidates. And Giri has obviously done pretty well in a lot of these online tournaments that have occurred. So it'll really be interesting to see how he tries to maximize his chances in the candidates. Because, you know, Giri and Magnus have some sort of cute rivalry, and I'm sure that Anish would love the chance to be able to dethrone the king. Okay, so e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, e5. The Sicilian Sveshnikov variation, which has been around for quite some time, but recently I think has shown a resurgence due to it being one of Magnus Carlsen's favorite lines. So e5, knight db5, d6, and bishop g5, a6, knight a3, b5, threatening b4 to fork the two knights. So knight d5, bishop e7, bishop f6, bishop f6. And so some of you might be wondering, and again, I won't go too far into the theory. I myself am not too well versed in the Sveshnikov, but some of you might be wondering, why would white exchange a bishop for a knight? It seems a little bit premature. Well, the defining feature of these types of positions is this centralized knight. This knight is a beast. This knight is an absolute monster. And so giving up a bishop to try to guarantee that the knight stays on d5 is definitely worth it. And as you can see with the Lichess database, it's clearly by far and away the main line. So bishop f6, c3, rook b8, knight c2. Why does the knight go to c2? The knight's going to c2 because it wants to reroute to e3 and support his buddy, the knight on d5. So bishop g5 is just directly prophylaxis against that. If white were to play knight c to e3, then bishop takes e3 is definitely on the horizon. So bishop g5, g3, castle, h4, taking advantage of the fact that the bishop is on g5 and trying to expand on the king side. Bishop h6, a3, a5, queen d3. I believe this move is a novelty. If we look at the Lichess database, bishop g2 seems to be the move, but like there aren't that many games in here. So queen d3 seems to be a new move from Nepo. Knight e7, knight c e3, finally going from a3 c2 to e3. And as we discussed a few moves ago, bishop takes e3. Just snap that knight off so that the knight's future on d5 is a little in question. So knight takes e3, bishop e6, rook d1, rook b6. Gotta defend this d6 pawn. This d6 pawn is a very important part of black's play because the d6 pawn is actually a backwards pawn and is oftentimes a weakness. So bishop h3 offering exchange, bishop b3, rook d2, queen c7, castle, rook fb8, rook c1, rook c6, bishop g4, h6, bishop d1, bishop e6, bishop g4, offering a repetition, bishop b3, bishop d1, and they actually ended up accepting a draw here. Now, I know a lot of you who are on the social medias, maybe the Twitter sphere, will say, well, this is typical Anish Giri, just getting a quick draw, but actually this is really driven by Nepo, and I thought that it was a little bit of a premature decision at first. There's still a lot of life in this position, a lot of battles that can be had. White's really fighting for control over the center, whereas black is trying to orchestrate a break on the queen side. And the way I would try to justify this is I think Nepo, having had like 1 year's time between the first half of candidates and the second half of candidates, was like, yo, I just want to draw. Like, I want to make sure I don't lose this game. I'm still in first place. And so I'm going to opt for the safe approach, being the tournament leader. So it does make sense from Nepo's side. I wonder if Giri could have potentially pushed, but of course, when you're playing at this elite level, a draw with black should not normally be a bad thing. But we'll see if this draw ends up haunting either of the players. It's going to be really interesting as things shake up in the future rounds. And this draw actually put Nepo at 5 out of 8. So he's doing very well for himself. He's still in first place. And Giri's 4 out of 8. So he has a 500 record. And I really, I think we're going to see some continued fighting chess from him. Giri being one of the most well-prepared elite players right now, so we should definitely expect some action from him. Alright, so those were the two meh games, but the next two games promise a lot of action, and there's just so much to learn from these two games, so I'm going to try to go through them briefly, just try to give you an overview. I would highly recommend that you do explore these games yourself. If you're on Lichess, you can go to the Learn button. I meant to just hover over that. Learn, study, and there's actually a publicly available, and I'll actually pull it up here. There's a publicly available study that you can use, Candidates Tournament here, and you can find all of the games that were played in this round. But anyways, I just made a clone of this study just because I wanted to kind of add my own annotations. So let's see what happens between the two Russians. There's actually 3 Russians, but wait, are there 3 Russians? Yeah, Nepo's Russian. There's Kirill Aleksenko and Alexander Grishuk, Sasha Grishuk. This is an interesting game because Aleksenko, he almost controversially, was given the wild card spot by the organizers. He did have a very strong performance in the FIDE Grand Swiss. I believe that was in Isle of Man, and so they felt that he was deserving of this invitation. But he's the youngest player of the squad. He is the lowest rated, definitely the most green. But we'll see that there's no slouches in this tournament. So e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6. We've got a very typical French defense. e5, knight fd7, and I'm going to purposefully kind of play through these moves a little bit quickly. Queen d2, queen takes b2. Interesting thing about queen takes b2 is in the final game that we're going to look at, queen takes b2 didn't turn out so well for one of the players, so I won't spoil the surprise. Rook b1, queen a3, bishop b5, knight d4, bishop d4, a6, and yeah, I'm just going to kind of move through a couple of these next series of moves quite quickly. So let's get to a critical moment here. Bishop c5, rook e8, and so when you look at this position, black has the bishop pair, although he does have a very closed center. White seems to have some space advantage, but doesn't have the bishop pair, bishop and a knight. And so I thought this move c4 was very interesting because common logic, if you will, would say when you're playing against the bishop pair, you don't want to open up the position. Because that's how the bishops will get activated and will be able to show their true worth, show their range. And I think that that's generally a good guideline, but what you'll see with strong players is they understand these rules. You know, I don't need to tell these guys that bishop pair is good in an open position, but they more importantly know when to defy them, when there are more overriding principles within the position that should be taken into account. And so Aleksenko decides that he wants to play c4 because of the interesting space advantage that he has and because of how quickly his pieces are about to harmonize. So f6, Grishuk is trying to challenge the center, really trying to find an optimal way to break up this very strong complex with e5 and f4. And c takes d5, e takes d5, bishop d6. Really trying to anchor this pawn structure here by placing the bishop on d6. Now f takes e5, f e5, d4, knight f5, d3, king e3, bishop b5 to protect this d3 pawn, king e4. And I would like to ask those of you who are watching, comment down below. What do you think of this position? Is this position a middle game or is it an end game? There's still a lot of pieces on the board, but it seems to be in that, gray area where this could be described as a middle game or an end game. I'm not totally sure. I think it's more of an end game, but, there are a lot of pieces on the board. So let us know what you think this is in the comments down below. So rook c8, knight d4, bishop c4, rook d1, and we'll kind of play through these moves a little bit quickly. There's an interesting moment right here, bishop b3, and a very interesting practical decision from Aleksenko follows. He goes rook takes g7, and the reason why he does this is after king g7, rook takes d3. Aleksenko seems to have judged this position as probably roughly equal, but with an easier game for white. So, everyone can look at the engine evaluation of a position and try to proclaim that that's truth. And if we look here, I don't know what depth this was analyzed at, but Stockfish 13 is giving minus 0.9 for black. I imagine it would be a little bit closer to 0, given a higher depth. But really, it's the practical considerations that need to be taken into account. And this bishop on d6 and this pawn on e5 are really cramping black's style due to the fact that black just doesn't have that much space. So the active king coupled with the great harmonization of his pieces led Aleksenko to make this decision, and I think it's a very mature decision. I really I really like what he did here. So rook d3, a4, knight d2, bishop e6, and we'll kind of breeze through this. This endgame, I will say, is extremely complicated. I'm not going to be able to do it justice in this video, but if you would like to look through it further, really do take some time to analyze this yourself and without the engine, because that's where you get the most benefits. Bishop b4, rook a c7, and we'll just kind of take a look how this ends up playing out. So rook e3. Black is assuming a very passive position here. You know, the rooks are one of the worst blockaders for a pawn. And so with rook h8, it's really signaling that black understands that, you know, this is very uncomfortable and he's got to try to hold. But Aleksenko is able to finish this off very nicely. And actually, rook a8, I believe, was the decisive move. I don't think that this depth stockfish is showing it, but from what I've seen from other annotations, rook a8 seems to be the move that ended it. But I would like to just show, if white plays e8 queen, rook e8, rook e8, rook e8, king e8, this position's not so simple and is probably already drawn. After king f5, king d7, king f6, bishop h2, king f5, the reason why this is not necessarily a winning position for white is because if you look at this this rook pawn, it's promoting to a light square, whereas this is a dark colored bishop. And so when the bishop is the wrong color of the rook pawn, that typically means that it's a drawn position. And because this king is not too far away, black can just punt this pawn away and just defend here. So not so easy, even if it seems like black has made a mistake. Bishop c7, rook g8, rook e4, king f5, rook f4, and then I'll just kind of play through this. It's very nice, the final position. I would like to say just a nice professional repetition by Aleksenko just to gain some time. Rook e8, king f6, rook e6, and then rook e4. Very nice move, threatening rook f4 check, but also just to grab this pawn. King f6, bishop d8, king f5, king e8, king e4, and king f8. A very nice finesse from Aleksenko to force the promotion of this pawn. And then Grishik resigned in this position. So Aleksenko is showing that he's no slouch. I know the chess world probably had some doubts of inviting him here, but you know, he got his first win, and he's definitely a lot more confident after beating a legend like Sasha Grishuk, and that puts him at that actually puts both of them at 3.5 out of 8. Aleksenko getting his first win and Grishik getting his first loss. All right, the last game and the crown jewel of this round, and perhaps maybe even the tournament, is the game between Fabiano Caruana of the United States and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave of France. So let's see what happened here. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4 takes, knight f6, knight c3, a6. The Sicilian Najdorf variation, one of the most highly theoretical lines in all of chess, and also MVL's pet line. So obviously Fabi knew what to expect here, and given a year off, you can tell that he had some really sick prep here. So bishop g5, e6, f4, queen b6, queen d2, queen takes b2. The often dreaded and feared Sicilian Najdorf poisoned pawn variation. It's very dangerous for both sides, but you know, these two are studs, and they're going to definitely have some deep prep. So rook b1, queen a3, e5, h6, bishop h4, de5, fe5, knight e4, queen a2, rook d1, queen d5, queen e3, queen takes e5. So it's kind of a crazy looking position. White has sacrificed 3 pawns, but what white is saying here is that he has so much piece activity and has enough compensation. And this is one of the reasons why the poison pawn variation is so crazy. It is just like a minefield, and if you don't know what you're doing, you might end up losing the game very quickly. So queen e5, c3, bishop c5, bishop g3, queen d5, and bishop c4, a novelty from Fabi. And you know, I should mention that in this position, I think Fabiano had more time than he started with due to the 30-second increment, whereas MVL was spending some time. So if you're MVL, you've been playing the Najdorf your entire life. This is a tried and trusted weapon of yours. You know that like Fabi has some good prep here, and it's kind of nerve-wracking. So queen takes c4. Fabi has sacrificed 3 pawns and a bishop. That is just nutty. So queen takes c4, bishop d6, and just take a moment to drink this position in. Like, how ridiculous is this? Like, bishop takes d6, knight takes d6, immediately loses due to the fork. It's just really crazy how deep Fabiano's prep runs, and I think the whole chess world is probably in awe, but also a little bit scared of Fabi after this game. Okay, so knight f6. I'm gonna skip ahead. Actually, there's just some there's a flurry of variations here. Very hard to really explain all of them, but knight c7, rook d3, yep, rook takes c8. Now, this position, white is the exchange up, but black does have 2 pawns, so this is not so easy of a position. Black probably has good chances to hold this, but it's going to take a lot of technique. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to this position. And this position, a lot of commentators, if you were watching the live streams, were saying that this is a draw. That's because there's a thing called a table base, which is able to show, and we have already proven that certain positions under X number of pieces are winning, lost, or drawn. So this is a 6-piece table-based position, and the table base was basically shouting out that this is a draw. But just because the table base says that doesn't mean that a human is going to be able to convert it. And as we see here, it's a very treacherous position. So king g3, king f7. What I'll also say here is highly recommend you really study this endgame deeply. It's super complex, but that's how you get stronger as a player. King g6, rook d6 takes. And so what do we have here? Finally, Fabi has been able to take that second pawn, and now we have a rook and pawn versus a knight and pawn. And this is a very complicated position. But what I've noticed from studying certain table-based positions is that the stronger side, in this case white, will really try to play where they are stronger. And so if you look at this pawn imbalance with the pawn on g2, pawn on f6, white is stronger on the h-file. So he's going to try to carve out his path on the h-file. This is something that you'll really notice repeated if you look at table-based positions. So knight f7, king e4, knight h6. And there's a lot of moves here that might not really make too much sense. But I'll try to explain them as best as I can. So knight h6, actually, believe it or not, this was the blunder that lost MVL the game. The reason, well, I can't really give you the exact reason, but knight g7 is actually what he should have played. And this is because the fortress, if he's trying to build a fortress, is maintained with the knight on g7. He covers this h5, f5, e6 squares, and if white is not able to penetrate and the pawns get exchanged, a rook versus knight is actually a draw for the knight. So this would have been the way to play. Instead, he goes knight h6. And I hesitated to put double question mark. I mean, he has to get one question mark because it was the losing move, but, he's human. So rook g3, king f7. And what you'll start to notice is that white actually does this dance with his king, like a triangular dance. So if you've heard of triangulation in endgames, well, this is how he's trying to poke holes into black's position. So king e4, king f5, king f4, trying to gain tempi in any way possible. And this is basically exactly what happens. And the final really nice demonstration of this is king f4, knight h6, rook g3. Believe it or not, this is a Zugzwang. And the reason why, if you remember, we were talking about the stronger side for white. So after rook g3, basically knight g8 is forced. And so now you see Fabiano start to penetrate. King g4, king h5, going into the stronger side. And the rest of this game is very short. King g6. And actually, MVL resigned here. So a valiant effort from MVL, but Fabiano, man. I mean, played this game like an absolute machine. You know, he came in with some really hot, really sexy prep against MVL's pet Najdorf, and he was able to take it all the way to this table base endgame and just show exceptional level of class. And I don't know, if you're Magnus Carlsen and you see this game from Fabi, you've got to be wondering, you know, maybe Fabi's not the same player I played in the World Championship so many years ago. And I think, you know, at this point in the standings, Fabiano and MVL are both tied at 4.5 out of 8. But because of the head-to-head score between them, Fabi actually has the tiebreaker. So MVL is definitely not going to be feeling too good. He's going to have to outscore Fabi, because if they tie, Fabi would get higher, would be placed higher on the tiebreaks. So if we just take a look, again, just to summarize the standings, Nepo is at 5 out of 8. Fabi and MVL both 4.5. We've got Giri and Wang Hao at 4 out of 8. So still, you know, within striking distance, but there's only 6 games left, and it's not easy to collect W's in this type of format. So they're going to have to start to feel some sense of urgency. Alexenko and Grishik at 3.5 out of 8, and then Ding Liren sitting at 3 out of 8. So very interesting. It's going to be super exciting to see what ends up happening here, but ultimately I think we've got what we wanted, and the players are really showing some inspired chess, and that's exactly what we could hope for as chess fans. So thank you for watching this recap. If you liked this, smash that like button, hit subscribe to the Lichess YouTube channel. It does help. And if you also liked some of my commentary, you can check out my YouTube and Twitch channels. That is youtube.com/Aakash, AAKAASH, and twitch.tv/Aakash, same spelling. Alright guys, until next time, peace.